Mr. and Mrs. Carter request the honor of your presence." I didn't move. I read it again, slower this time. Mr. and Mrs. Carter. Not my name, not and family, not the groom's mother, just them. My fingers stayed on the edge of the card, still for a second too long. Across the room, Olivia glanced up, just briefly. Then she looked away like nothing had happened. Ethan shifted beside her. He cleared his throat, but he didn't say a word. No one corrected it. No one explained it. That's how I knew this wasn't a formatting mistake. They saw it, and they let it stay that way. I placed the invitation down carefully on the counter, aligning the edges without thinking. I noticed the envelope still had my handwriting on it, from when I'd written their address myself. The kitchen felt too still for a moment that should have meant something. I nodded once, as if everything made sense. But something didn't. Not loudly. Not all at once. Just enough to feel wrong. Because this wasn't new. It just wasn't hidden anymore. If something like this can happen in plain sight at your own son's wedding, you start to wonder how long it's been happening without you noticing. My name is Martha Green. I'm 62 years old. I raised my son alone after my husband died when Ethan was 10. I used to believe that kind of history stayed with you. If you've ever felt yourself slowly pushed out of someone's life, you'll understand this. Stay with me. This didn't start with that invitation. It started years ago. Quietly, when Ethan first brought Olivia around, everything looked fine. She was polite, always polite. The kind of polite that sounds right, but doesn't reach you. She would smile, but her eyes moved on quickly. She would thank me, but it always felt finished, like a task. At the time, I told myself I was imagining things. Ethan didn't seem to notice, or maybe he did, and chose not to. He was busy. That's what he said. Busy building his company. Traveling, meetings that always seemed to run long when I called. At first, the calls didn't stop. They just got shorter. "Hey, Mom, I've got 5 minutes. Can I call you back later?" Later didn't always come, so I filled the silence myself. Cards, small packages, things that didn't take up space, just enough to stay present without getting in the way. That's what it became. Not connection. Positioning. When they bought their first house, I offered to help. "Let me know if you need anything," I said. Olivia smiled. "We've got it covered." It sounded polite. I still sent money when they mentioned repairs, a roof, plumbing, things that came up in passing. Most of the time, it wasn't even a question. I'd just transfer it before they had to ask. I didn't ask questions. By then, it had already become a pattern. I covered things, and they moved forward without ever checking back. I thought that was what support looked like. Looking back, the pattern feels obvious. I wasn't included. I was informed. Birthdays turned into quick messages. Holidays became, "We're traveling this year." Gifts I brought sat unopened until I asked about them. I told myself not to take it personally. I made myself smaller, because I didn't want to lose him. That's the part people don't talk about. Distance doesn't arrive all at once. It shifts, quietly, gradually, until one day you're standing in your own kitchen holding a wedding invitation that doesn't have your name on it. And suddenly, it's clear. I sat down at the table, the card still in front of me. Sunlight hit the paper, making the gold lettering stand out more than it should have. Mr. and Mrs. Carter. I didn't know them. Not really. We had never shared a proper meal, never sat long enough to become family, and yet they were hosting my son's wedding. I thought about calling Ethan, asking him to explain it, but I already knew how that conversation would go. It's just how they wrote it. It doesn't mean anything. "You're overthinking it, Mom." Maybe he'd apologize, maybe he wouldn't. Either way, nothing would change, because this wasn't about one line on a piece of paper. This was years of being moved, quietly, politely, out of the center. Now it was written down. I placed the invitation flat against the table and looked at it one more time. Then I looked around my kitchen, the same table where Ethan used to sit doing homework, the same place where he used to ask me questions about everything and nothing. There had been a time when I didn't have to wonder where I stood. Now, I did. I exhaled, slowly. Not anger. Something steadier, something that didn't rush, but didn't go away either. And for the first time in a long while, I stopped trying to explain it away and just sat there, letting the weight of it settle. Knowing I couldn't keep pretending I hadn't seen what was right in front of me. I didn't move for a long time after that. The house looked the same, but it didn't feel the same anymore. The invitation was still on the table, perfectly aligned, like it belonged there more than I did. I stood up slowly and walked toward the sink, turning on the water just to hear something. As it ran, a thought surfaced. Something small, something I hadn't paid attention to before. "We're fixing a few things out there," Olivia had said once, almost casually. "Not your place, not the lake house, just out there." At the time, it hadn't meant anything. Now it did. I turned the water off and dried my hands, my eyes drifting back to the table. There was a name that came to mind without effort. Linda. I hadn't spoken to her in a while, but I knew she would answer. She always did. I picked up my phone and called before I could reconsider. She answered on the second ring. "Martha, everything okay?" I hesitated, not because I didn't want to tell her, because I didn't know where to start. "I got the invitation," I said. A pause. Then, quieter. "And?" "It doesn't have my name on it." Silence, not empty, just steady. "Not even mentioned?" she asked. "No." Another pause. "That's not an accident," she said. I leaned against the counter, letting that settle. "No," I said. "It isn't." "You've been feeling this for a while, haven't you?" It wasn't a question. I thought I was overthinking it. "You always do," she said gently. "You explain things until they feel harmless." I glanced at the invitation again. I didn't want to make something small into something bigger. "And now?" I exhaled slowly. "It's already bigger." Linda didn't interrupt. She never rushed me. "That house," she said after a moment. I frowned slightly. "What about it?" "The lake house. They're getting married there, right?" "Yes." "And they've been going back and forth? Setting things up?" "Yes, they've mentioned it." "How long has that been happening?" I thought about it. "I'm not sure. Months, maybe longer." There was a quiet shift in her tone. "Martha, when was the last time you were there?" The question stayed in the air longer than it should have. I searched for an answer and found one I didn't like. "A few years ago." "And in all that time they've been using it?" "I guess so." "Did they ever ask you?" The question landed sharper than the others. "I mean, it's Ethan," I said. "He wouldn't need to—" I stopped. Wouldn't he? Linda didn't fill the space. She let the silence do the work. Or did they just assume it was theirs? She added quietly. I straightened slightly, the words catching somewhere deeper than I expected. "They mentioned repairs," I said. "The roof, plumbing, things like that. And you?" "I sent money." "How much?" "Enough to cover it." "And you saw the work afterward?" "No." The answer came too quickly. "Too clean." Linda paused again. "Martha, who's been paying the property taxes?" "I have." That one was easy. Every year, same bill, same routine. "Insurance?" Still in my name. And the deed? I didn't answer. Not because I didn't hear her, because I hadn't asked myself that question in years. After my husband passed, everything had just stayed as it was, or at least I assumed it had. I haven't checked recently, I said. That's not what I'm asking, Linda replied. I closed my eyes for a second. In my mind, it's still mine. In your mind, she repeated. The words didn't challenge me. They clarified something I hadn't wanted to look at. I pushed myself away from the counter and walked back to the table. The invitation was still there. I had paid for most of what led up to this day, and still somehow ended up outside of it, unchanged. But I wasn't looking at it the same way anymore. They've been making decisions, Linda continued, using the property, planning an entire event. It's a wedding, I said quietly. Yes, she replied, at your house. I didn't correct her, because I wasn't sure I could. The thought settled into place, slow and steady, not dramatic, just undeniable. I thought about the way they talked about it. We're fixing things. We've got it handled. It's going to look amazing. At the time, it sounded like involvement. Now it sounded like control. I sat down, my hands resting flat against the table. I never questioned it, I said. Of course you didn't, Linda said. You trusted him. I looked down at the wood beneath my fingers. Familiar, solid, and suddenly uncertain. What are you thinking? She asked. I didn't answer right away, because the thought wasn't fully formed yet, but it was there, growing. I think there are things I haven't looked at in a long time, I said. Linda didn't respond. She didn't need to. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was steady, like something waiting to be seen. I looked at the invitation one more time, not as something that left me out, but as something that pointed to something else, something bigger. And for the first time, the question wasn't just why my name wasn't there. It was whether anything had ever really been mine to begin with. I didn't hang up right away. Linda stayed on the line, quiet, like she knew I needed a moment to catch up with my own thoughts. I'm not saying anything's wrong, she said finally. I'm just saying, you should know. I do know, I said, though it didn't feel entirely true. Then look, she replied, just look. We said goodbye after that. No pressure, no urgency, but the silence she left behind felt different from before. It wasn't empty, it was pointed. I set my phone down and stood there for a second, my eyes drifting toward the hallway. There was a cabinet I hadn't opened in a long time, not because I couldn't, because I hadn't needed to. At least, that's what I had told myself. I walked toward it, slowly, each step more deliberate than the last. The house was quiet, but not the kind that settles you, the kind that waits. I opened the cabinet and reached for the box on the top shelf. It felt heavier than I remembered. I set it down on the dining table, the same place the invitation had been earlier. For a moment, I didn't open it. I just looked at it. This box had always meant something simple. Records, documents, things you keep, not things you question. Now it felt different, like it might answer something I hadn't been ready to ask. I lifted the lid. The folders inside were exactly where I had left them. Neat, labeled, ordered in a way that used to make me feel in control. I pulled out the one marked property. My hands moved steadily. Inside were copies, deeds, insurance forms, tax statements, years of paper that had quietly held everything in place. I flipped through them, scanning familiar details, addresses, dates, signatures, and then I saw it, the original deed. I stopped. My eyes moved over the page once, Then again. Martha Green. Only one name. No transfers, no added signatures. Just mine. I held the paper still, reading the line one more time, slower now. The room didn't change. Nothing around me moved. But something inside me did. I kept reading. The language was formal, but clear enough. Survivorship rights. Full transfer upon death. My husband's name had once been there. Now it wasn't. Everything had passed to me. Completely. No conditions, no shared ownership, no changes made since. I leaned back slightly, the paper still in my hand. Nothing had been taken. Nothing had been altered. Everything was exactly where it had always been, except I hadn't been standing in it. I moved to the tax records. Every year. Paid. I never missed a payment, not even the year I had to cut back on everything else. My name, my account, the insurance matched, everything tied to that property led back to me. I hadn't missed a single detail, and yet I had let it feel like it didn't belong to me anymore. I set the papers down and looked at them. The shift didn't rush in. It settled. Not anger, not even hurt. Something steadier. Clarity. I reached for my phone again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I searched for a number I hadn't used in years. Andrew Keller. He had handled everything after my husband passed, precise, methodical, the kind of man who didn't leave room for confusion. The phone rang twice before he answered. Andrew Keller! It's Martha Green. A brief pause, then recognition. Martha, it's been a while. It has. What can I help you with? I glanced down at the papers spread across the table. I need to confirm something. Go ahead. The lake property. It's still in my name, correct? A short pause. Give me a moment. I waited, my fingers resting lightly on the deed. Then, yes, he said. It's fully in your name. No co-owners, no transfers since your husband's passing. I closed my eyes briefly. And there's nothing pending? No. Everything is clean. You have full ownership. The words landed with weight, not just information, confirmation. Can anyone use the property without my permission? I asked. If you haven't granted access or signed anything, then no, he said. They don't have legal authority to host events or make decisions. I let that sit. And if they've been doing that anyway? Then they're acting without legal standing. Simple. Direct. But it changed everything. I thanked him and ended the call. No drama, no raised voices, just facts. I placed my phone down beside the papers and leaned back in my chair. The room hadn't changed, the house hadn't changed, but the way I sat in it had. For the first time since I opened that invitation, I wasn't trying to understand what had happened. I already knew. They hadn't taken anything. I had stepped back gradually until it looked like the space was empty, and they had filled it. Not loudly, not aggressively, just naturally. The realization didn't hit like a shock. It settled into place. I gathered the papers into a neat stack, aligning them carefully, not out of habit, out of intention. I looked at the invitation again, same words, same absence, but it didn't feel the same anymore, because now I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. This wasn't about being left out, it was about something being assumed, something that still, very clearly, belonged to me. I rested my hand lightly on the documents. Knowing that was one thing, but doing something about it, that was something else entirely. It wasn't the mistake that stayed with me. It was how easily I had let things be handled without me. I sat there a second longer than I needed to, because once I knew that, I couldn't pretend this was just a misunderstanding anymore. I pulled up just before the driveway opened fully into the lake house and stopped. For a second, I didn't get out. I just looked. The house was exactly where it had always been. Same structure, same windows catching the light at an angle I knew by memory. But everything around it was different. A long white tent stretched across the side yard. Rows of chairs faced the water. Strings of lights ran between the trees, even in daylight. People moved through the space with purpose, carrying boxes, adjusting fabric, setting things into place, like they belonged there. I stepped out of the car, the gravel sharper under my feet than I remembered. No one noticed, not at first. I walked a few steps closer, staying just off the main path. A man with a clipboard passed by, speaking into a headset. "Make sure the arch is centered. We need symmetry." He didn't look at me, didn't slow down, just kept moving. I turned toward the porch. The front door was open, wide. People moved in and out without hesitation, carrying things, placing them, rearranging them. Someone laughed inside, easy, familiar, like this wasn't new. I took another step forward. The dock caught my attention next. Fresh wood, reinforced edges, clean, finished. I hadn't approved that. A couple walked past me, carrying folded chairs, talking about where to place them like they had done it 100 times before. Someone else crossed the lawn with a tray of glasses, not slowing down, not looking up. From the patio, I could hear Olivia's voice, clear, steady, giving directions. "Let's move that table closer to the edge." No hesitation, no pause to check, just decisions being made. A man I didn't recognize stepped inside through the side door, calling out to someone in the kitchen as if he belonged there. No one stopped him, no one asked. The door stayed open behind him. For a second, I stood there, watching it all continue without interruption. Like I was the only one who didn't know how this had already been decided. No one had even called to tell me it was happening. Hadn't even seen it. And yet, it was done. I let my eyes move across everything. Slower now. The tables under the tent were already arranged, catering stations set along the side, coolers stacked neatly, a truck parked in the back with its doors open, workers unloading more supplies. This wasn't preparation. This was execution. Plans already made, decisions already carried out. Without me. I heard Olivia before I saw her. "No, the linens go on after the tables are placed. We don't want them dragging." Her voice was steady. "Certain." I turned toward it. She stood near the center of the lawn, holding a clipboard, speaking to two people who nodded quickly before moving. She didn't look unsure. She didn't look like someone asking permission. She looked like someone in charge. Ethan stood a few steps behind her, talking with someone from the catering team. He glanced around occasionally, not searching, just checking, making sure things were moving. He looked comfortable, like this was where he was supposed to be. I stayed where I was, far enough not to interrupt, close enough to see. Olivia moved from one group to another, adjusting small things. A centerpiece shifted. A runner straightened. A quiet correction here. A quick instruction there. People listened, followed. It wasn't just that she was organizing. It was how natural it looked, how unquestioned it was. I turned slightly toward the house again. The windows were open, curtains pulled aside. Inside, I could see boxes stacked along the walls, labels I didn't recognize, temporary things, placed as if they belonged. There was no trace of anything that felt like me. Not a photo, not a detail, nothing that suggested this space had existed before today. A woman walked past me carrying folded chairs. She slowed when she noticed me. "Hi," she said, polite but distracted. "Are you with the family?" The question settled quietly, not sharp, just unaware. I held her gaze for a moment. "Yes," I said. She smiled, relieved. "Great. Can you let Melissa know we're ready for the next set?" I nodded, though I didn't move. She was already walking away. With the family. That was the closest I had come to being placed. And even that felt assigned. I looked back toward the lake. The chairs were perfectly aligned now, facing the water, facing a view I had stood in front of for years. Same angle, same light. But now it felt distant, like something I was watching, not part of. I took a slow breath. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't an oversight. This was structure, built piece by piece. Every decision, every quiet shift that had led here, they hadn't asked. They hadn't checked. They had simply moved forward. And everything around me reflected that. I looked at the house again, at the open door, at people moving freely through it, at Olivia, still directing without hesitation, at Ethan stepping easily into conversations that didn't include me. Nothing about this felt temporary. Nothing about it felt uncertain. It was complete, and I was standing outside of it. I took a step forward, then stopped. Not because I didn't understand what I was seeing, because I did. For the first time there was no confusion left, only distance, clear, defined, and real. I stood there for a moment longer, letting everything settle exactly as it was, and this time it wasn't about figuring anything out, it was about what I was going to do next, because standing there, watching them take ownership of something that was still mine. I knew I wasn't going to stay where I was for much longer. I stepped forward. This time, I didn't stop. Gravel shifted under my feet as I moved onto the main path. People adjusted around me, until they didn't. Olivia noticed, first. Her voice cut off mid-sentence. The clipboard lowered slightly. "Martha," she said, recovering quickly. "You're early." Early. Like I had a place on her schedule. Ethan turned at the sound of my name. His expression shifted. "Mom," he said, stepping closer. "We didn't know you were coming today." I didn't say I was. My voice stayed even, controlled. A few people nearby slowed without looking directly, close enough to hear. Olivia straightened. "We're just finalizing a few things," she said, gesturing lightly around her. "I can see that." Ethan shifted his weight. "We were going to call you later, walk you through everything." "I don't need a walkthrough." The space between us tightened. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder. Not fast, not dramatic, just enough. Olivia's eyes dropped to it. Ethan's followed. "I came to confirm something," I said. Neither of them spoke. I did. I opened the folder and slid the deed out, holding it where they could see. "This property is still legally mine." For a moment, no one said anything. Not Olivia. Not Ethan. Even the people standing nearby seemed to pause, like the room had shifted and no one had been told how to respond to it. Someone behind them stopped mid-step, half-turned, as if they weren't sure whether to stay or leave. The music in the background didn't stop, but it felt quieter somehow, like it had been pushed further away. Olivia's smile didn't disappear, but it changed. Tighter, measured, like she was recalculating something she hadn't expected to have to think about. Ethan looked at the paper again, not quickly this time, slower, reading it like he needed to be sure it said what it actually said. No one reached for it. No one argued. They just stood there. And for the first time since I'd arrived, it felt like the space had stopped moving forward without me. The words didn't echo, but they carried. Ethan froze for half a second, just enough to show it. Olivia didn't move, but her grip on the clipboard tightened slightly. "I spoke to Andrew Keller this morning," I added. "No transfers, no co-owners, no permissions granted." No one stepped in. No one corrected it because they couldn't. This isn't about paperwork, Ethan said, his voice lower now. It's a family event. At my house. The sentence landed cleanly between us, not raised, not forced, just placed. And this time it didn't pass. Olivia stepped in, calm but firmer now. We've been putting a lot into this. Repairs, setup. It's taken time. I'm aware. And you never objected. I was never asked. And the more it happened, the more it started to feel normal. Like my role had already been decided without me. Not once, not about the house, not about the wedding, not even about the guest list. That shifted something, not dramatic, but real. Ethan exhaled, slower this time. We assumed... I know, I said. That's the problem. I lowered the deed slightly, still visible between us. This isn't just about paperwork, I continued, quieter now. It's about being moved out of something that was never yours to take over. Neither of them answered, because there wasn't an easy way to. I'm not here to stop anything, I said. Ethan's shoulders eased just a fraction, too early. But this doesn't continue the way it has been. Olivia's gaze sharpened. What are you asking? Not asking. A brief pause. Setting terms. That held. First, no use of this property without my written permission. Not now, not later. Ethan frowned. That feels... formal. It is. Because it needs to be clear. Second, this event continues under a written agreement. Temporary use. No assumptions beyond that. Olivia's eyes didn't leave mine. And third, I said, steady, the invitation is corrected. That one landed harder. It's already been sent, she said. Then it can be reissued. That's not realistic. It is, if it matters who's actually hosting. Silence, not empty, decisive. Ethan looked between us, the tension no longer something he could step around. This is a lot, Mom. No, I said quietly. It's very little. I held his gaze. I'm not undoing anything. I'm making sure it's acknowledged. That was the line. Not control, recognition. Olivia glanced at him, not asking permission, waiting for alignment. He didn't respond immediately, but something in his posture changed. He understood. There wasn't a position to argue from, not one that held. Finally, he nodded. Okay, he said. We'll put something together, and we'll fix the invitation. It wasn't warm, it wasn't easy, but it was clear. Olivia didn't agree out loud, but she didn't push back either. That was enough. I gave a small nod. Not approval, acknowledgement. Around us, movement started again. People picked things up, voices returned, but not the same way as before. Something underneath it had shifted. I slid the deed back into the folder and closed it, carefully. No rush, no hesitation, just finished, for now. But the space wasn't the same anymore. They were still moving through it, still setting things up, still preparing for the wedding. But they weren't moving the same way. Not as freely, not as automatically, because now there was something in the middle of it all that hadn't been there before. A line, clear, unspoken, and impossible to ignore. The sun was lower by the time the rehearsal dinner began. The lights that had been strung through the trees earlier were now on, casting a soft glow over the yard. The lake reflected just enough of it to make everything look calmer than it felt. From a distance, it was beautiful. Up close, it was something else. I arrived a few minutes after it started. Not late, just not early. People were already seated under the tent, conversations layered over one another, glasses set out, plates half filled. No one was looking for me. That part was clear right away. I stepped inside the tent slowly, letting my eyes adjust, not to the light, but to the arrangement. Round tables, assigned seating. Names printed on small folded cards. I moved closer to one of them, reading quietly. Carter, 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 then a few others. Friends, extended family. I kept moving, scanning, not rushing, until I found mine. It was near the edge. Not at the center table, not near Ethan, not near Olivia, not even near the immediate family grouping. Just placed, like an afterthought that had been remembered at the last minute. I picked up the card and looked at it for a second longer than I needed to. Martha Green. No title, no role, just the name. I set it back down. For a second, I wondered if I'd somehow missed something, but deep down, I knew I hadn't. The card was printed on thicker paper than it needed to be. Carefully. Across the tent, I could see Ethan seated near the front, speaking with Olivia's parents. He hadn't noticed me yet. Or maybe he had and chose not to interrupt the moment. Olivia was beside him, smiling, leaning slightly into the conversation, her attention fully there. She didn't glance around, didn't check the room. Everything about her said she already knew where everything, and everyone, belonged. I took my seat. The chair felt lighter than it should have, or maybe I just wasn't settled into it. A woman beside me turned, offering a polite smile. "Hi," she said. "I don't think we've met." "No," I replied. "We haven't." She nodded, then turned back to her conversation without asking further. No follow-up, no curiosity, just acknowledgement, and then nothing. Dinner moved forward, plates were served, glasses filled, conversations rose and fell. From where I sat, I could hear laughter from the center table, louder, easier. Someone tapped a glass lightly, drawing attention. A short toast. Olivia's father stood, smiling warmly. "We're so glad everyone could be here," he began. His voice carried easily across the tent. He spoke about family, about welcoming Ethan, about how this weekend meant bringing people together. I listened, not for what he said, for what he didn't. There was no pause, no mention, no shift toward where I was sitting. The words flowed around me, not through me. I kept my expression neutral, my hands resting lightly in my lap. Across the table, someone leaned closer to another guest, whispering something that ended in a quiet laugh. The conversation continued, like nothing was missing. After the toast, people clapped softly, glasses lifted, and then everything resumed. I took a small sip of water, letting the moment pass without reacting to it. This wasn't new, just clearer. A server passed behind me, adjusting a plate slightly before moving on. A small correction, a small movement. But it stood out. Everything here was being managed. Everything had a place. Except me. I looked toward the center again. Ethan was listening now, nodding at something someone said. He looked relaxed. Present. Part of something. I studied that for a moment. Not with anger. Just observation. Because earlier that day, things had shifted. Not loudly, but enough. And now I could see it more clearly than before. The distance wasn't just emotional, it had structure, placement, position, and it had been accepted by everyone in this space, including me, until now. I placed my hands on the edge of the table and adjusted my chair slightly, not leaving, not withdrawing, just repositioning. It was a small movement, but it changed the way I sat, the way I faced the room. A few minutes later, one of the organizers walked by, checking something on a list. She paused near my table. "Excuse me," she said, glancing at the seating arrangement. Then she looked at me. "Oh, are you Martha?" "Yes." She checked her paper again. "We might need to adjust a few seats. Would you mind moving to the next table over?" The next table. Further back. Further out. I looked at her for a moment, then at the empty seats she was referring to, then back at her. No, I said. Not sharp, not loud, just clear. She blinked slightly, not expecting that. I'm seated here, I added. A pause. She glanced at her list again, then nodded. Of course, she said quickly. That's fine. She moved on. The table stayed as it was. Nothing dramatic happened. No one reacted. But something shifted. Small, quiet, real. I didn't move again. I didn't need to. Dinner continued. Courses changed. Voices blended. The lights above us grew warmer as the sky darkened. At some point, Ethan stood and made his way around the tables, greeting people. He moved naturally, stopping where conversations were strongest. When he reached my table, he hesitated for a fraction of a second, then stepped closer. Everything okay? He asked. Yes, I said. He nodded. A brief pause. Then he moved on. No introduction. No acknowledgement beyond that. But he had stopped. That was new. It wasn't enough to fix anything, but it was just enough to tell me this wasn't going to stay the way it had been. I watched him walk back toward the center, not following, not waiting, just noticing, because the shift wasn't going to happen all at once. It never did. It happened like this, in small moments, quiet corrections, subtle lines being drawn where there hadn't been any before. By the time the dinner started to wind down, the conversations had softened. People stood, moved, gathered in smaller groups. I remained where I was for a moment longer before standing, not lingering, not rushing, just choosing when to move. As I stepped out from under the tent, the air felt cooler. The lake was darker now, reflecting only the lights above. Behind me, voices continued. Plans for the next day. Timelines. Final details. Everything moving forward. I paused briefly at the edge of the path, looking back once. The space was still theirs. For now. But not in the same way. Not completely. And that was enough. For tonight. Because tomorrow, everything would be seen more clearly than it had been before. Morning came too quickly. The lake was still when I stepped outside. Quiet, flat, like nothing had shifted. But everything had. By the time I returned, the house was already moving again. Hair, makeup, schedules, voices layered over each other, sharper now, more focused. The ceremony unfolded exactly the way it had been planned. Beautiful, controlled, seamless. I sat where I had been placed. Second row, not beside Ethan, not beside Olivia's parents, close enough to be seen, not close enough to matter. The music started. Olivia walked down the aisle, every step measured, every detail aligned. People leaned forward, smiled, some cried. I watched, not from a distance, just with clarity. Ethan stood at the front, steady. He didn't look around, didn't search. His focus stayed forward. The vows were said, the rings exchanged. Applause followed. Everything happened exactly as it was supposed to. And then it was over. The photographer stepped in almost immediately. Family photos first. People moved quickly, forming groups near the lake. Olivia's parents stepped into place without hesitation. Relatives gathered around them. Names were called. Positions adjusted. Parents here. Closer, yes. Like that. I stood nearby. Not stepping forward, not stepping back. Waiting. Groomside? The photographer called. Ethan shifted slightly, then paused. A moment too long to be nothing. Okay, great. Let's do this group first, she said quickly. The camera clicked. I wasn't in the frame. The photographer didn't pause. She adjusted the group slightly, guiding someone a step closer, tilting a shoulder, fixing a line that already looked complete. Just a little tighter, she said, smiling. No one questioned it. No one looked around to check if someone was missing. The camera clicked again. And again. A few people laughed softly, leaning into each other like they had done this before. Someone behind me shifted, stepping forward to get a better view, then stopped when they realized there was nothing left to see. I stayed where I was. Not hidden, not exactly, but not part of it either. From where I stood, I could see Ethan clearly. He glanced once, briefly, like something didn't sit right. Then the moment passed. The photographer moved on. "Next group," she called. And just like that, it was over. No one even stepped aside like they had noticed. They rearranged. Immediate family. Another group formed, tighter this time, closer. I stayed where I was. Someone stepped in front of me without noticing, blocking the view, blocking the frame. I shifted half a step to the side. Still not called. The photographer glanced past me, over me, like I was already accounted for. And that was enough. If that were you, standing there watching your place quietly disappear, would you step forward or stay silent? I'd want to know, stay with me, because what happened next changed how everyone in that room saw me. The reception began soon after. Music filled the space. People moved easily, conversations picking up again. I took my seat. Same pattern, same distance. Dinner was served, toasts followed. Olivia's father spoke again, then one of Ethan's friends. Stories, laughter. The room warmed around them. And still, nothing reached me. No acknowledgement, no shift, just continuation. I listened, not for inclusion, for confirmation, and it was there, in what wasn't said, in what didn't need to be said. At some point, someone tapped a glass. Would anyone else like to say a few words? The question hung there. Light? Optional? Safe? No one moved. I did. Not quickly, not to interrupt, just deliberately. A few conversations slowed, heads turned. Ethan looked up, Olivia followed. I stepped forward, moving toward the microphone. No one stopped me. By the time I reached it, the room had settled. Not silent, but close. I wasn't planning to speak, I said. My voice carried. But I think I should. A subtle shift moved through the room. I've been listening all day, I continued, to stories about family, about belonging. I let that sit. I remember when that meant something very simple. A pause. Building something together. I glanced toward Ethan. Just for a second. I raised my son with that idea. No accusation, no weight added, just truth. That home is something you create with people. I looked back at the room, not something you step into and assume is already yours. The air shifted. Quietly, but clearly. I'm glad this day is happening, I said, and I'm glad everyone is here. Another pause, longer this time, because this part mattered. But I think it matters to say something clearly. No one moved. This house, this place, has been part of my life for a long time. I let the silence hold, just enough. And everything you see here? My eyes moved slowly across the room. Every part of this, a breath. Didn't happen without me? Nothing followed. No applause, no immediate reaction, just stillness. People didn't look away. They didn't know where to look. Ethan didn't move. Olivia didn't speak. The moment stayed exactly where it landed. And for the first time that entire day, I wasn't the one standing outside of it. No one moved right away. The silence didn't break. It held, not awkward, not confused, just still. Like the room hadn't decided what to do with what I had just said. Then, slowly, sound returned. A chair shifted. Someone cleared their throat. A quiet voice started somewhere near the back. Conversation didn't come back all at once. It came in pieces, careful, measured. I stepped away from the microphone. Not rushing, not waiting, just done. As I moved back toward my table, I could feel it, the difference. People looked now, not openly, not staring, but aware. A glance that stayed half a second longer. A pause before turning away. Recognition, not loud, but real. I sat down again. The chair felt different this time, more grounded. Across the room, Olivia was speaking to someone, her voice low, controlled, but the edges of it sharper than before. She didn't look at me. Not yet. Ethan stood where I had left him. Still. Processing. Then he moved. Not toward the center. Toward me. He didn't rush, but he didn't hesitate either. When he reached my table, he stopped just short of sitting. "Can we talk?" he asked. His voice was quieter than before, not defensive, not controlled in the same way it had been earlier. Something else. I looked at him for a moment, then stood. We stepped away from the table toward the edge of the lawn, where the noise softened just enough. The lights from the tent didn't reach as far here. The lake was darker now. Still. Ethan exhaled slowly, like he had been holding it in longer than he realized. "I didn't expect that," he said. "I know." He nodded once. A small movement. Then he looked out toward the water instead of at me. "We weren't trying to—" He stopped. Didn't finish the sentence. "Leave me out?" I said. He closed his eyes briefly. "It wasn't like that." I didn't answer right away because I wasn't interested in arguing the wording. "It became like that," I said, instead. That landed differently. He shifted his weight. "I should have said something earlier," he admitted, "when things started getting bigger." "Yes," I said, no hesitation, no softening. "Yes, you should have." He let that sit. Didn't push back. Didn't defend it. "I didn't think about how it looked," he added. "I know." That was the truth. He hadn't thought about it. That was the problem. Silence settled between us again. Not empty. Just clear. "I'm sorry," he said finally. He said it quietly, like he wasn't used to saying it out loud. The words were simple, not rehearsed, not dressed up. I watched him for a second, measuring them. Not for how they sounded, for where they came from. Then I nodded. "I hear you." I realized I wasn't waiting for an apology anymore. I was deciding what I would accept from here on, not forgiveness, not dismissal, just acknowledgement. He glanced back toward the tent, then back at me. "We'll fix the invitation," he said, "and the agreement. I'll make sure it's done properly." "I expect that," I replied. He nodded again. "I'll also make sure you're included tomorrow." "Properly." I held his gaze. "That's not something you can add in after the fact." He paused, understanding, or at least beginning to. "Inclusion isn't a correction," I continued. "It's something that's there from the start." He didn't interrupt, didn't argue, because he couldn't. "And I'm not asking for a place at the center," I said. "I'm making sure I'm not placed outside of it." The distinction mattered. He looked down briefly, then back up. "I didn't see it that way," he admitted. "I know. That wasn't new either." He exhaled again, slower this time. "Then tell me what you want me to do," he said. I considered that. Not the question itself. What sat behind it? "I want you to understand it," I said. "Not just fix it." A small shift in his expression. Subtle, but real. "And I want it to be clear going forward," I added. "This house, this space, this isn't something you step into and assume." He nodded, this time, without hesitation. "I understand. Maybe not fully, not yet, but enough." "That's where we start," I said. We stood there for a moment longer, not as far apart as before, But not close either. Something had changed. Not everything, but enough to feel it. Behind us, the reception continued, voices rising again, music picking up, the evening moving forward, like it always would. Ethan glanced back once more. "I'll take care of it," he said. "I know you will." And this time it didn't sound like assumption, it sounded like expectation. He nodded once, then turned and walked back toward the light. I stayed where I was for a moment longer, looking out at the water. The surface was still, unmoved, but underneath, everything had shifted, and it wasn't going back to what it had been before. The night didn't end all at once. It softened. Voices lowered. Music slowed. Conversations broke into smaller circles, then into quiet goodbyes. By the time I walked back toward the house, most of the lights were still on, but the energy had changed, not gone, just quieter, more aware. People noticed me now. Not in the same way as before. There was a pause when I passed, a small space made where there hadn't been one, not out of obligation. Something else. Recognition. I didn't stay long after that. There wasn't anything left for me to prove. Not to them. Not to myself. Inside, the house felt different again. Not because anything had been moved, but because I was no longer looking at it from the outside. I walked through the living room slowly, my hand brushing lightly along the back of a chair. The same chair Ethan used to sit in years ago, legs too short to reach the floor. I paused there for a moment, not holding on to the memory, just acknowledging it. Then I moved on. The space didn't feel unfamiliar anymore. It felt returned, not perfectly, but enough. Footsteps approached behind me. I didn't turn right away. "Mom?" Ethan's voice was softer now, less certain. I turned. He stood a few steps away, hands at his sides. Not guarded, not defensive, just present. "I spoke to the planner," he said. "They're updating the seating for tomorrow. You'll be at the main table." I nodded once. "And the photographer," he added. "You'll be in the full family set, properly placed this time." I let that sit. "I've also asked Andrew to send the agreement tonight," he continued. "Nothing moves forward without you seeing it first." There was a pause after that, a careful one. "I know that doesn't fix everything," he said. "No," I replied, "but it's where I start." I looked at him, not weighing the words, just noticing them. Then I nodded. "It is." He exhaled quietly. Not relief. Something steadier. "I'll make sure tomorrow is different," he said. I held his gaze. "Make sure tomorrow is clear." He paused, then nodded again, this time without hesitation. "I understand." Not fully. Not yet, but enough. He stepped back. "I'll let you rest?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He turned and walked out, his footsteps fading into the quiet of the house. I stayed where I was, alone, but not in the same way as before. The silence didn't press in, it settled. I moved into the kitchen and poured a glass of water, the familiar motion grounding in a way it hadn't been earlier. The invitation was still there. Same place, same words. But it didn't carry the same weight anymore, because now it wasn't the only thing defining what this was. I picked it up, running my fingers lightly along the edge. The paper was already slightly bent at one corner, then set it back down. Not fixing it. Not yet. That would come. But not from me doing it quietly, the way I used to. I walked toward the window and looked out at the lake. Dark now. Still. Unchanged. The same view that had been there through everything. Through the years I didn't question where I stood. Through the quiet moments I stepped aside without even noticing. And now, through the moment I stopped. I stood there for a while, not thinking, not trying to resolve anything, just standing in a place that no longer felt like it could disappear without me noticing. I reached for the light switch by the door, paused for a second, then turned it off. The room dimmed behind me, leaving only the reflection of the lake through the glass. Sometimes you don't realize you've stepped out of your own place until you're standing in it, and it no longer feels like it belongs to you. If you were in my position, would you have spoken up the moment you felt yourself being quietly replaced? Or would you have stayed where you were even when you knew something wasn't right? I'd really like to hear how you see it. And if this story stayed with you in some way, you can let it travel a little further, to someone who might understand it too. I'll be here with more stories like this.